Every year, the city of Harbin throws the biggest winter party in China. Working in sub-zero temperatures, an army of 18,000 men and women convert 250,000 gallons of water a day into 6,000 cubic yards of snow. And cut river ice into 1,100-pound ice cubes. They have just 4 weeks to transform an empty lot into a frozen theme park bigger than Disneyland. This is the Harbin Ice and Snow Festival. With a population of over 10 million, Harbin is one of the biggest cities in China. But unlike most of the nation's provincial capitals, Harbin has a very short history. Until 1896, the city was little more than a small cluster of fishing villages. In the Manchu dialect, Harbin means drying fish nets. Today, the small fishing villages have been transformed into a winter wonderland. Harbin is nicknamed the Ice City for obvious reasons. Winters are dry and bitterly cold. For 3 months, the average temperature hovers around 0 degrees Fahrenheit. But from out of the long, cold winter nights emerged the famous art of ice sculpture. Harbin held its first International Ice and Snow Festival in 1985, and it's become one of the biggest events of its kind in the world. But there was a time when Harbin was more famous as the Moscow of the Orient. Halfway between the North Pole and the equator, Harbin is the capital of China's northernmost province. Siberian Russia lies just a few hours to the north, which explains the frigid weather and the Russian influence on the city. Harbin owes its existence to the China Eastern Railway, built by the Russian government to connect Vladivostok to Harbin. Completed in 1903, the railroad transformed Harbin from a chaotic frontier town to an international metropolis. In 1907, China proclaimed Harbin an open city, and 19 countries, including the US, established consulates there, setting up several thousand industrial, commercial, and banking companies. At the time, Art Nouveau was the hottest ticket in architecture, reflected in the design of many of Harbin's public buildings. But the city is most famous for its unique Russian-influenced architecture. White Russians fleeing the revolution in 1917 flocked to Harbin, creating the world's largest Russian migrant population. Within a few years, Harbin was known as Little Moscow. The streets of Harbin still contain many dome-shaped structures, a nostalgic throwback to pre-revolutionary Russia. The St. Sophia Orthodox Cathedral is one of the most magnificent structures in Harbin. The cathedral began life as a wooden building in 1907 to provide Russian troops with an imposing spiritual symbol. By 1921, Harbin had a population of 300,000, including more than 150,000 Russians. So 2 years later, work started on a more permanent construction. Today, St. Sophia Church is hailed as a monumental work of art and the largest Orthodox church in the Far East. Modern Harbin is a product of the century-old rivalry between China, Russia, and Japan for control of Manchuria. In 1932, the Japanese occupied the city for 13 years, until the Soviets took control after World War II. Harbin finally came back to China in 1946. This volatile history gives the city a richness all of its own. But in winter, people come to Harbin to admire the city's architecture of ice. The people of northern China developed a distinctive folk art, a beautifully wrought world in which ice is the carrier and light is the soul. Today's elaborate sculptures began as a winter tradition. "400 years ago, people created lanterns of ice to go fishing. The lantern began as a bucket of water brought inside before it froze solid. A hole was chiseled in the top, and the liquid drained from the interior, creating a hollow cavity for a candle. The chamber of ice formed a windproof lantern, perfect for farmers and fishermen. Anglers would cut holes in the frozen rivers and use the light of the lantern as a lure to attract fish. In Harbin, the Songhua River is frozen for 6 months of the year. So instead of fish, it's more common to see horses on the ice. You have to be tough to survive in this extreme climate. And animals don't come much tougher than the Chinese Mongolian horse. The short and shaggy horse is perfectly adapted to the terrible cold, able to graze all year round without supplemental feed, even when the ground is covered with snow. The horses are a popular attraction on the Songhua River. At Harbin, the ice is so thick, it supports a fully loaded bus. The river is used as a road, a skating rink, and a track for thousands of locals to race horses. Making up nearly 1/3 China's equine population, the Chinese Mongolian horse has extraordinary stamina. Used for long-distance riding, carrying heavy loads, and strenuous farm work, when hitched together, Chinese Mongolian horses can pull up to 4,000 pounds over 30 miles a day. They may not be the most expensive or elegant breed in the world, but Chinese Mongolian horses surely made their mark on history. Today, they pull carriages full of visitors, but once, these horses were ridden by the warriors of Genghis Khan. Despite the bitter cold, horses are not the only ones hard at work on the river. In December, thousands of people cut ice from the Songhua River to create the building blocks for Harbin's International Ice and Snow Festival. But the tradition of harvesting ice goes back nearly 3,000 years. Harbin is the coldest provincial capital in China, with temperatures falling to a bone-chilling -36 degrees Fahrenheit. But the people of Harbin have extraordinary endurance and a passion for creating immense works of art out of ice. Early in December, an empty lot is transformed by an army of artisans and festival volunteers. They have just 4 weeks to create the Harbin Ice and Snow Festival, with 5 main exhibition areas and more than 100 activities, including 40 ski fields. And much of the festival is made from blocks of ice. Fortunately, Harbin in winter has no shortage of frozen water. And in northern China, people have been harvesting ice for nearly 3,000 years. Farmers living in the highlands would flood their fields before winter. When the water was frozen, it was cut into blocks and stored in ice houses, which kept fish fresh in the warmer months of summer. Today, an army of 2,000 ice cutters work overtime for 15 days to haul 400,000 cubic yards of ice out of the Songhua River, enough to fill 100 Olympic swimming pools. Each block of ice weighs over 1,000 pounds. Trucks do some of the heavy lifting, but work on the river is done by hand. The harvesting begins at 5 a.m. in almost complete darkness and continues until 6 p.m. Every day, a 10-man team cuts and hauls a quota of more than 2,500 cubic yards of ice, enough for 200 truckloads. The first step of the ice harvest is called notching, when the river is cut into strips 1,300 feet long. Saws and chisels are used to split the ice into rectangular slabs, 5 feet long and 1.5 feet thick. Before the ice can be used in the festival, it has to pass quality control. Inspectors examine each block, looking for clear ice that will shine brightly under the festival lights. Locals say the ice of the Songhua River is particularly translucent, as it freezes slowly each winter. Clear ice is not necessarily related to the purity of the water. Transparency is usually the result of slow freezing from one direction. The flowing river carries away impurities, allowing the water molecules to freeze in a uniform crystal lattice structure. Choosing ice from the right part of the Songhua is vital. In the middle of the river, the fast-flowing current under thin ice is too dangerous to harvest. Ice within 5 yards of the bank is filled with silt and too dirty. Cutting the ice requires skill, strength, and bravery. Workers with electric saws can never cut along the direction of the current unless they want to cause the ice surface to collapse. If the ice is cut incorrectly, all the team is in danger. But despite the risks and the mind-numbing cold, some ice harvesters have been coming to the river every winter for over 20 years. Many are farmers. In just 15 days of cold, hard labor, they make as much money as they earn after several months spent on the farm. But getting the ice out of the river is just the first step in creating a winter wonderland. An even bigger army of 15,000 men and women, working day and night, transform the blocks of ice into a wonderland of glittering light. Fairy tale palaces, towering pagodas, and even an Egyptian sphinx are built from bricks of ice, cemented together not with concrete, but water. In Harbin, an army of artisans do amazing things with ice. They have just 4 weeks to transform an empty lot into China's biggest winter festival. Covering over 700,000 square yards, it's bigger than Disneyland. Hundreds of ice sculptures, some on an epic scale, are designed by local engineering students. Each structure is modeled on computers to estimate the volume of ice required and to help the construction teams visualize their task. Turning the plans into reality takes an army of 15,000 dedicated craftsmen. Chainsaws rough the biggest blocks into shape, but for more detailed work, sculptors use hand saws, picks, drills, and even scalpels. 100 swing saws cut slabs from the Songhua River into ice bricks, 2 feet long and 1 foot wide. These bricks are the basic building blocks of the Ice Festival, forming an icy skin around a skeleton of steel. Some of the magnificent towers and castles are as tall as 20-story buildings. Without a framework of steel, they would surely collapse under the weight of 11,000 tons of ice. The ice bricks are easy to use. Instead of mortar, the workers cement them together with water, which freezes instantly in the sub-zero temperatures. The hardest part is lifting the ice bricks into position. Each brick weighs over 100 pounds. Blocks too big to be lifted by hand are shifted into position by 30 cranes and more than 20 gantries. Once the basic structure is in place, a team of chiselers go to work smoothing the surfaces. Cracks and gaps are easily filled with a bucket of water. The ice is polished until it's perfectly smooth. The finished paths and steps are incredibly slippery. So before the park opens, red carpets are rolled along the main thoroughfares to minimize accidents. Ice sculpting has even been turned into a sport. 35 teams from 16 countries travel to Harbin to compete in the annual International Ice Sculpture Competition. Teams are given 3 days to saw, scrape, and smooth a piece of art out of a chunk of ice 6.5 feet tall, 6.5 feet wide, and 1.5 feet thick. Competitors are usually from countries with harsh winter climates, like Russia, Switzerland, and Finland. The 3 days of competition are all held outside, the sub-zero temperatures making the event a test of endurance as well as artistic expression. Creating art from ice isn't easy. It's a variable and volatile medium. The characteristics of ice change according to its temperature and the temperature of its surroundings. However, there's another group of artists in Harbin who work with a very different medium. In 2007, they set a Guinness World Record for creating a sculpture more than 800 feet long, over 90 feet high, built from nearly 500,000 cubic feet of man-made snow. In Sun Island Park, the home of Harbin Snow Sculpture Art Expo, there's no shortage of snow in winter. In theory, sculptors could just roll a snowball across the ground until it was several yards in diameter, and then start carving their masterpieces. But in practice, the snow would be too dirty, too inconsistently packed, and too heavy to move. So organizers create artificial snow. 250,000 gallons of water from the Songhua River is pumped into snow machines, generating 6,000 cubic yards of pure, clean snow every day. A convoy of trucks carry the snow from the river to the snow sculpture park. Sculptors prefer working with artificial snow because it's more weather resistant and remains whiter longer than the real snow on the ground. However, even artificial snow is too powdery to be worked with chisels, so the snow has to be seriously compressed. "24 teams of snow sculptors from 14 countries come to Harbin to compete in the Festival of Snow and Ice. Each team starts with a block of snow 13 feet tall, 10 feet wide, and 10 feet thick. Long before the sculptors unpack their tools, snow is packed into massive wooden boxes and allowed to settle. To make the blocks taller, more boxes are piled on top and filled with yet more snow. When the walls come down, the sculptors go to work. Unlike carving blocks of ice, snow sculptors have to start at the top and work their way down. The hardest part is creating the intricate details. Sculpted snow is very hard to fix once it's fallen apart. In past years, teams of 600 sculptors from 40 different countries used 4 million cubic feet of snow to create epic sculptures. Each year, the festival has a theme. In 2011, it was fairy tale kingdoms, and sculptors created everything from gingerbread houses to palaces, fairies and monsters, and even a snowy Medusa. snow sculpture is a form of performance art. Sculptors work outdoors in full view of spectators. Competitors have just 3 days to transform 36 tons of snow into intricate pieces of art, so sculptors often work throughout the night. And working beside the artists is a huge support crew, preparing the frozen city and its roads for the million visitors arriving for the opening of the festival. There is no shortage of volunteers ready to help. When the festival opens, international craftsmen have created more than 300 pieces for the Harbin Snow Sculpture Art Expo. The artwork looks even better at night. Lit by spotlights and lasers, the sheer size of the snow sculptures is brought sharply into focus. In 2011, the biggest piece was more than 320 feet long and took 200 workers 2 weeks to complete. This remarkable sculpture is composed of nothing but compacted snow, yet it's overshadowed by its neighbors, extraordinary structures carved from ice, towering high above the frozen city of Harbin. The Great Wall of China is the largest man-made structure on the planet, more than 2,000 years in the making. But this Great Wall of Ice was built in a matter of days. Just one of hundreds of famous structures created as part of Harbin's International Ice and Snow Festival. The Great Wall of Ice surrounds one of the world's largest ice sculpture parks, containing some of the finest examples of ice art on the planet. Many sculptures are surprisingly interactive. In a recent festival, the Great Wall of China doubled as an enormous ice slide. The slides can be slippery, speedy, and scary. Luckily, people are well padded with multiple layers of clothing, so the only thing damaged is dignity. Each year, the designs are different. The ice sculptures are considered a never-to-be-repeated fairy tale, as once they're melted, they're never built again. In 2011, the festival's theme was Fairy Tale Kingdom, So craftsmen created sculptures of landmark buildings from around the world. In 2011, it cost $18 million to create the theme park, visited by more than 1 million people who braved the frigid conditions to explore the icy wonderland. Some people even come here to be married. More than 1,000 couples from across China, Russia, Japan, and the United States have used the ice sculptures as an incredible backdrop for their wedding ceremonies. The centerpiece of the ice and snow world is an icy fortress, modeled after Neuschwanstein Castle in Germany. Complete with working elevators and escalators, the structure is almost 150 feet tall and 270 feet wide. In winter, days are short in Harbin. Visitors usually make the most of the sunlight to explore the art on display in the Festival of Snow. The carriages return to the Festival of Ice at night because that's when the architecture of the Ice City really lights up. When darkness falls, more than 60 miles of LED lights encased in translucent building blocks transform Harbin into a neon fantasy land. In the frozen northwest of China, when the sun sets at 4 p.m., the sky lights up. This is when the ice city of Harbin comes alive. Once, visitors to the International Festival of Ice and Snow saw a world lit by standard incandescent light bulbs. The introduction of weather-resistant fluorescent tubes saw a revolution in the icy architecture. Suddenly, structures could be built bigger and brighter. In 2008, more than 100,000 fluorescent tubes were carefully placed in blocks of ice during the construction of the massive sculptures. Laid end to end, the lights would stretch more than 60 miles. But recently, the festival has gone high-tech. Instead of thousands of single-color fluorescent tubes, 80% of the ice and snow world is now illuminated by computer-controlled light-emitting diodes. The LED lights can put on quite a show. Cooler than standard bulbs, the LEDs are also more environmentally friendly. They have a longer lifetime and consume less energy. And Harbin is becoming increasingly aware that the environment is changing and its famous festival is under threat. Today, the average winter temperature of Harbin is 9 degrees Fahrenheit warmer when compared to data from historical records. According to the local meteorological bureau, the rising temperatures have had a detrimental effect on the event. In 2007, warm weather kept the Songhua River flowing through autumn, meaning organizers had to ship ice down from the north. In 2008, huge screens were erected to prevent sculptures melting in the heat of the midday sun. But on this night, the temperature is a reassuring -4 degrees Fahrenheit, and the sculptures are safe until the arrival of spring. The wonderland of ice and snow will eventually thaw, and millions of gallons of water will drain back where it came from, into the Songhua River. But by then, work will have begun planning an even bigger and better festival in Harbin, the icy heart in the land of the dragon.